everyone. Welcome to the Analyst of Vajiram and Ravi. This discussion is dated of 9th of August 2023, and in today's news analysis, we will be doing an in-depth discussion on articles derived from both the Hindu and Indian Express. A gentle reminder along with this that the handout is available in the description below, so do check it out. Coming to the articles of the day, the first article, we will have an analysis on Comptroller and Auditor General of India, because some irregularities have been reported in the world's largest healthcare scheme, that is Ayushman Bharat, by the CAG office recently. In the second article, we will be learning something from the CHIPS Act of USA and how will it contribute in providing impetus to the semiconductor industry of India. In the third article, due to a recently published report, we will be reading about TB and India's TB burden. From prelims point of view, we will be covering topics of Select Committee, which has been under row in the Parliament recently, and on border security, we will be reading about Assam Rifles. So let's get started. Starting with our first article, in this we will talk about the Office of Comptroller and Auditor General. Now, in the words of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, it is amongst the most important office in the Constitution. So we shall be having an in-depth analysis on the same. This pertains to GS2 part of the syllabus of UPSC, where we read about constitutional bodies, CAG being one among the most important of them. Now, what is the context? The context is that some irregularities have been highlighted in the rolling out or in the finding of beneficiaries, in enrollment of the beneficiaries of Ayushman Bharat Yojana, where they have observed that about 7.5 lakh recipients have been found to be linked with a single mobile number. So this irregularity has been highlighted by the Office of CAG recently. Before diving deep into the topic, let's try to understand what is the Office of CAG. So, this is a constitutional body which is mentioned under Part 5th of the Constitution, particularly from Article 148. In this article, it says that it is the guardian and the watchdog of the public purse of India. So basically, we understand that our CAG is nothing but the watchdog of public purse. What do we understand by this statement? This statement can be justified by the powers and the functions that have been given to CAG, not by constitutional provision, but by a parliamentary act, a parliamentary amendment that was rolled out in the year 1971. So the CAG Rules Act of 1971 illustrates some powers given to the CAG. What are these powers? First and foremost is performing auditing on the expenditures made from the public purse. Now, we are time and again saying that it is a watchdog of public purse. What do we mean by public purse? Public purse is yours and mine money, which is stored or which is kept with the government, state government or the central government of India. So, any expenditure from that particular public purse will be audited by CAG. Not only that, it also performs the role of auditing the expenditure and receipts of the funds or of the accounts of any body that is substantially funded by the government. Now, it could be a governmental corporation or it could be a government company. The third is auditing account of any authority which the President of India has suggested to audit. So, for example, local self-government or the local bodies are though not directly under the purview of CAG's audit, but they can be put under the purview if President says so. So such bodies also comes under the auditing function. Now, very recently, from the Supreme Court ruling on Association of Telecom Services Provider versus Union of India case of 2014, it was ruled out that CAG will also be expanding its jurisdiction to cover auditing for public-private partnership projects which has got exponential or substantial amount of funding from the government. Along with that, it also ascertains net proceeds from the tax and the duties that are levied upon us by the government. So that is again its function. Once it has done auditing all of these things, it will obviously be preparing some report, right? So these reports are then submitted to the President of India as one among the functions of CAG. It has to do it regularly. Not only that, it also is a friend, a philosopher, a guide to the Public Accounts Committee. It helps in its functioning. And last but not the least, it helps and enforces in upholding the constitutional values in the domain of financial administration. Now, when I say this statement, should I also be substantiating it with some of the cases which has highlighted the significance of CAG in India? So yes, there are some cases. First and foremost is the 2G scam exposed by the Comptroller and Auditor General Office in the year 2001. This, first of all, imposed executives accountability, leading to resignation of the then telecom minister, and not only that, it also helped government improvise its financial management. So government changed its way of allocating the spectrum after this particular expose. Second one, in the very next year, in the year of 2012, CAG report helped to expose the coal gate or the coal mining scam, having similar repercussions, leading to enhanced executive accountability, leading to resignation of the minister. In the year 2017, a report was submitted by CAG on the Rafale fighter jets that were imported from France. Now, on analysis of these reports, it was found that there was some of the misappropriations done from the side of government on purchase of these fighter jets. So that was also exposed. And very recently, in this year, we will see that world's largest healthcare beneficiary scheme, that is Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana or the Ayushman Bharat scheme, that has also been exposed of some irregularities by the CAG. While it has significance, it, just like any other body, will also be having some challenges. So what are the challenges with CAG? First and foremost is issues in the appointment process of the body. Appointment of CAG in India. The appointment is made by the President of India, but under the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, which adds subjectivity into the process, which hampers, which creates impediment into the autonomy of the office of CAG. So this is one among the challenges which needs to be dealt with. The second is, CAG in India works under post-mortem effect. That is, it does analysis of the dead body. It does not have the power of its UK counterpart. It has been taken from the UK constitution, where the CAG over there has both powers of comptroller and auditor. But in the case of India, CAG only has the power of being an auditor and not really of a comptroller, which means it cannot do auditing of the pre-expenses or at the pre-budgetary stage. Only after the expenses have been made by the government, then only CAG comes into fore and plays a role of auditing. So it performs a menial role of auditing only after the expenditure stage. Then comes the limited scope of the auditing that is given. First of all, it doesn't have controlling powers. Second, even if it has auditing powers, it doesn't have very vast powers. It is only limited to financial audits, but it is not given the power to do propriety audits or evaluation of the schemes, the impact of the scheme, the qualitative analysis of the schemes on the society, on the citizens of India. That is something CAG cannot do. A report of International Organization on Supreme Audit Institute in the financial year of 2010 to 11 has said that the quality of the report that CAG submits is also not very good. It's fairly poor. What suggests is, here's few data. First of all, about 25% of the reports or the 25% of the data that was founded by CAG is not backed by strong inputs. So therefore, we cannot substantially put up the allegations. Second, about 50% of the data did not highlight the essential government steps that government was ought to take or government should have taken in the direction. So these are some of the major lackings of government's or CAG's report. Some political scientists or public administrationists believe that the CAG office in India is irrelevant in nature. It is nothing but an offshoot of regressive colonial legacy, whereby because British were ruling over here, so they brought their CAG office from UK into here with much lesser functions, with much lesser powers. So according to the public administrationist Paul Appleby, the office of CAG in India should be abolished. Upon analyzing all these challenges, can I ask what should be the way forward? Should the way forward be to abolish the office of CAG in India? No, because we know that there are some significances associated to it as well. So what should be the way forward? Way forward essentially should be to re-engineer the office of CAG as suggested by B.P. Mathur. Re-engineering means that the CAG body, the office of CAG itself requires regular assessment. So according to B.P. Mathur, in every 3 years, the office of CAG should be reassessed, the report should be re-evaluated. Then it should be given the power to perform pre-acquisition audits, especially in the domain where a lot of expenditure has been made. For example, in the purchase of major defense imports. For example, your Rafale jets, because they require a lot of money out of the pockets. So therefore, or out of the public purse. So therefore, it is important that pre-acquisition audits should also be empowered to CAG. Next comes enlarging the ambit of auditing. Enlarging by giving them the power to do propriety audits as well, performance audits as well. So this will enhance the executive's accountability. Last but not the least, auditing of social sector schemes. See, in India, we are a socialist society, developing nation. So what is essentially required? A lot of money should be given in the social development, so that it eventually leads to economic development. While there is nothing wrong in giving a lot of money in the social sector, schemes, it is important for us to audit those social sector schemes. For example, we have Manrega, we have Ayushman Bharat, we have MP lads. So there is an essential need for the CAG to be empowered to do audits of these social sector schemes, which will eventually lead to good governance in India. Now let's talk about the second article. In the second article, we will discuss about this article which says what are the learnings that India can gain from the CHIPS Act of USA. In this, we shall be doing an analysis of the semiconductor prospect and industry in India. What are the challenges, what are government initiatives, and what we can really learn from this particular policy. It pertains to GS3 part of the syllabus, where we not only study about Indian economy, but also infrastructure, but also science and tech, in which we study about developments, applications and innovations. But first, let's talk about the context. This particular policy, or the CHIPS Act, can be elaborated as creating helpful incentives to produce semiconductors, and Science Act 2022. So this particular policy has completed 1 year. And this article elaborates how and what India can learn from this particular policy. Before diving into the topic, let's first understand what are semiconductors. See, semiconductors are any materials which have got their conductivity lying in an intermediate range between conductors and insulators. So basically, they are not as good conductors as metals, but at the same time, they are not as bad conductors as, say, plastics. So what are semiconductors made up of? It can be made up of elements like silicon and germanium, or it can be made up of compounds like gallium arsenide or cadmium selenide. Now when we understand that what are semiconductors, why are we studying about the policy? Why are we observing such an important policy impetus around us, around the world, with regards to semiconductor industry? The reason is, just as data is the oil for 21st century, semiconductor is the very lifeblood of the ICT industry, information and communication technology industry, the very building block of the fourth industrial revolution. And therefore, there is a huge need. But there are other factors also which elaborates the need of developing a strong semiconductor policy, not only in the world but also in India. First and foremost, semiconductors are the drivers of ICT age and the fourth industrial revolution. See all the technologies that you are looking around you, for example, Internet of Things. For example, your servers for big data, for example, robotics, for example, the 5G technologies. All of them have nothing but have got semiconductors at their very building core. So these are the building blocks of fourth industrial revolution. So if a nation wants to pursue fourth industrial revolution, it needs to be independent. It needs to become self-reliant in semiconductor manufacturing. That is the first need. Second need is because it has huge geopolitical significance. How? First of all, the semiconductor manufacturing is heavily localized industry, heavily localized in about 4 countries. These are your Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and China. China specifically has been doing aggressive acquisition of the chip manufacturing or of the chip industries or of the assembly lines in the semiconductors. This is also leading to supply chain disruptions, which was obviously observed during COVID times, where when the supply chain disrupted, the inputs, the raw materials, or the assemblies were affected because we could not get semiconductors from China or from these 4 countries. So the whole world realized that it is important to gain self-reliance in semiconductors. This has led to eventually politicization of this industry, or eventually creating strong policies around this industry. This is leading to silicon politic. Silicon politics is even more important when trade wars like that of US and China is going on. Aggressive acquisition from China is going on, and there are also allegations of espionage and threat on national security with the help of semiconductor industry, especially alleged on countries like China from US. This has led to the ban of Huawei, which was providing 5G technology in USA because it was a Chinese company. So this gains a geopolitical impetus with regards to semiconductor industry. What is the third need? Third need is because this is very crucial in the strategic areas. What are the strategic areas? Your communication, your defense, your space sector. For example, manufacture of satellites, manufacture of microsatellites, nanosatellites, manufacture of rockets. All of this requires deployment of semiconductors into it. Then you have got your power discom sectors. Not only these sectors are crucial, but they are also called critical infrastructure, because any threat, any attack on these infrastructure will ultimately lead to a threat on the national security. So that is why, in order to safeguard these crucial strategic areas, we need to become self-reliant in the semiconductor industry. Now that we know that semiconductor is applied across different areas of the economy, can we not say that it also has a multiplier effect? Which means if a nation will grow its potential or its production in semiconductors, it will ultimately lead to overflow in other sectors of the economy, ultimately leading to the GDP growth of the nation. So these are some of the needs due to which policy thrust has been observed across the world. Now, with regards to that, let's try to analyze the semiconductor policy of USA, which is namely the CHIPS Act, and let's try to compare and contrast it with the India's policy, and let's see what are the learnings we can gain from this act. CHIPS Act is nothing but essentially a heavy financing of about $50 billion that is done by the USA government to give an impetus to the semiconductor industry in the USA. It has got 4 major features. First of all, it has got a whole government approach, which means that the fund allocation for giving impetus to semicon industry is limited not only to the Ministry of Electronics, but also given to the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Commerce, so on and so forth, also Ministry of State. So cooperation and coordination between different sectors of the nation, of the economy is observed from this particular CHIPS Act. It leads to creation of 4 funds separated under different departments, but they are completely coordinated. Now, this is something that India needs to learn, because India has monopolized all of its fund down to Ministry of Electronics and IT. As you can see, the semiconductor industrial policy is created by whom? Ministry of Electronics. The assembly manufacturing is performed by ISM, which is a unit under Indian Semiconductor Manufacturing or Indian Semiconductor Mission. that this particular mission is also a unit under Ministry of Electronics only. The chip designing is performed by CDAC, which is again a PSU under Ministry of Electronics. So basically we understand that while we have only concentrated our policy approach down to one ministry, we need to expand it in lines with the CHIPS Act. Second, CHIPS Act has made provision for assessing the viability of the projects and the startups that are venturing into the space of semiconductors. This is something again India needs to learn, because though we have got viability gap funding options and we do have options of assessing those, but it is not done in a very transparent manner. Third, industry academia collaboration. This is very, very important, because we need to build a skill force. We need to have a collaboration so that industrial demands could be met by the skills that are imparted to the current generation or the technocrats. So for that, industry academia collab is a very important essential feature in the CHIPS Act. While in India, we do have an initiative, a program by government, which is called CHIPS to Startup Initiative, where industry academia collab is initiated, but it is again in a very nascent stage, and its jurisdiction is only for the government-backed institution, not for the private institution. So we also need to ramp up on that. Fourth, the scope of development for future technology. Now that we know that semiconductor manufacturing is not the only technology that we need to learn, we also need to learn advanced packaging, advanced manufacturing, and USA is trying to venture into these as well so that it can gain a competitive advantage over countries like China. So India also needs to learn this. Okay. While India faces various challenges, let's talk about some other challenges that India faces. First of all, semiconductor industry in generic is actually a very expensive, a very capital intensive industry. It has got horizontal integration, it requires large space, it requires skilled manpower. They needs to be paid appropriately. The units need to be maintained. For that, logistics, infra, cold chain development, all of that is required, which makes it very, very expensive. Second, it is a critical industry. It is very sensitive to the environment, that is the ambience that is created around it. So you cannot allow temperature above a particular threshold. You cannot have dust in that environment. It also has long gestation period of more than 3 months, which also makes the manufacturing process very, very long. So that is why the creation of a semiconductor industry itself is a tough task. The second point is that this industry is intensive in nature. It is not only capital intensive, but it is also power intensive, since it requires power supply of about 24/7 times. This is the reason it is majorly located near nuclear reactors, where 24/7 of power supply can be ensured. This is not really the case in India, and therefore Indian semiconductor industry is compromised. It is also skill intensive, since it requires skill of higher degree, which is that kind of talent, that kind of manpower is not really retained by India. It is drained into other foreign countries like USA and China. So this is another challenge which India encounters. India is active in only the third stage. In the supply chain infrastructure of semiconductor, there are essentially 3 stages. First is the design. This requires doing the patents, doing the research, creating innovative products around semiconductors. In the second stage, we have got manufacturing, fabrication of the chips, and in the third stage, we have got the assembly line. So creating or just assembling or not basically designing, but assembling the pre-designed units into one, that forms the last stage, which is the end product integration. India as such is only active in the third integrating process. So we are lagging behind highly in developing research, developing innovations, developing or creating manufacturing infra. Why? Because we are not giving that much capital, that much importance to the semiconductor industry. Last but not the least, such industry is highly localized, so it is affected by supply chain irresilience. So that is why when we saw COVID, we also saw that the economy got hampered because semiconductors were not able to reach out in India. Now let's talk about government initiatives and what can be the way forward. First and foremost, government had design linked incentive scheme. It tried to boost up the production by giving financial fundings, by giving financial support to the startups or to some PSUs. Then production linked incentive scheme is another government's effort. In order to create manufacturing clusters, Electronics Manufacturing Cluster Scheme 2.2 has been initiated by the Government of India, specifically by Ministry of Electronics. And then recently we have seen that Semicon India was going on in Delhi. So Semicon India is again an effort to bring or to collaborate industry, academia, and also boost up investments, especially foreign investments in semiconductor industry of India. What is the way forward? India needs to leverage its ties, its diplomatic ties with countries like Taiwan, South Korea, China, Japan, so that we can become one together. We can integrate the systems and bring a robust supply chain and leverage the semiconductor outputs of India. Now let's talk about the third article. Here we will deal with TB, tuberculosis and India. This pertains to GS2 part of the syllabus, where we read about issues relating to health. And one of the most important health issues for India is TB. What is the context? The context is that a recent Lancet report has shown or has underscored the importance of nutritional support in sharply cutting the death rates of TB or reducing the cases of TB, especially in India. Before approaching into the topic, let us understand what is this disease called TB or tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is an infectious bacterial disease caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which generally, but not only, affects the main organ, which is lungs of the human body. Now, when we talk about India, India has a huge TB burden. Why? Because about 27% of the total world's cases of TB can be observed only in India. Not only that, according to WHO, every 2 deaths in 3 minutes is observed due to TB. When we understand this, should we also analyze the risk factors or the reasons for the growing burden of TB in India? So what are the risk factors? First and foremost, the underlying poverty of India, the expansive poverty of India. Due to poverty, the living conditions are compromised. It leads to overcrowding. It leads to people living in unhygienic spaces. It leads to them compromising with their nutritional security, due to which malnutrition is occurring. Malnutrition is among the biggest risk factors, as about 40% of the total TB cases that have occurred in the last year or over the years have been accrued to the growth of malnutrition. It has also been highlighted by a study of NIRT Chennai, which has suggested that people who have weighted less than 35 kgs have been susceptible about 4 times more to the TB mortality as compared to those who have weighed more than 45 kgs. The second cause is pollution, the widespread air pollution. We know that India is among the worst polluted cities across the world. Pollution or air pollution in specific affects the lungs, which decreases the immunity first of all, and increases the susceptibility of getting TB infections. So pollution is another cause. Third is the prevalence of this disease called HIV/AIDS. This is a sexually transmitted disease of which India has the third highest burden, and it is observed that patients who have got HIV are also susceptible to developing TB. Next is lack of awareness and stigma around TB. TB is one of the most stigmatized diseases. Therefore, people refrain from coming out and seeking treatment because they fear ostracization from the society. Not only that, there is high lack of awareness, due to which people are not aware of the symptoms that they are developing, leading to delayed diagnostics, and because of which the mortality rate increases in India. Then TB is also posing a challenge in India due to the development of multi-drug resistant TB or extensive drug resistant TB. What are these? Due to mismanagement of the drug delivery, the medicine that is given to treat TB, because it has been given in improper dosages. As a result of this, the body has become resistant to these antibiotics. These antibiotics specifically includes isoniazid and rifampicin. If the body has become unreactive to these two antibiotics, the person is said to have developed multi-drug resistant TB. But if the body has become resistant to more than these two antibiotics, then it is said to have developed extensive drug-resistant TB. And India has got 24% of the total global burden of developing multi-drug resistant TB. So these are the India's TB burden. Government has been very active in this regard. So government has been taking a lot of initiatives, which includes creating a holistic policy to deal with TB. This policy is called National Strategic Plan for TB Elimination from 2017 to 2025. This is the particular year in which India aims to end TB in India, which is 5 years prior to that of WHO's or United Nations target. Second is, in order to raise awareness, Indian government has launched Pradhan Mantri TB Mukt Bharat Abhiyan for providing social and financial support to the TB patients so that they come out and do the diagnostics. Meanwhile, also securing their pockets is the Nikshay scheme. Very, very important from prelims point of view and from mains. In the Nikshay scheme, it has got two components. First of all, direct benefit transfer in the form of cash transfer. So the TB patients will be getting a pocket money of 500 rupees per month till their treatment is going on. This is to incentivize for them to pursue diagnostics and treatment. Second is to give them social support. So they will also be assigned counselors called Nikshay Mitras. They will be providing counseling, mental health support and other kind of social support to the TB patients. From the institutional metric, there are care and prevention centers which are created across the India in order to provide holistic care to the TB patients in form of giving them diagnostics, identifying them, giving them other benefits, and also giving vocational training to the practitioners, to the medical practitioners. All of this is involved in this care and prevention centers of TB. These were national initiatives. There must have been some international initiatives as well. So yes, first and foremost, it was pioneered by United Nations. It has got specialized bodies like WHO and United Nations AIDS, UNAIDS. Both of them are working to prevent and reduce the mortality and morbidity of the diseases like TB and AIDS. The United Nations target is to reduce the cases of TB to 95% by 2030. This is the target, and for India, the target is to eliminate TB from India by 2025. So please remember this. WHO, the specialized body, has also got the DOTS strategy, very important. You can be asked in prelims, what is DOTS strategy related to? So it is related to elimination of TB. Then there is a global fund to fight diseases like AIDS, TB and malaria. There's also an international union against TB and lungs diseases. So these are the governmental initiatives to deal or to eliminate TB disease. What is the way forward? Way forward is to address the primary underlying causes. We need to address pollution. We need to address malnutrition. We also need to address the social stigma that is going on with TB. Only then we can ensure that TB harega, desh jeetega. In the next article, we will talk about select committee because there has been a row in parliament regarding it. So let's see which part of GS it relates to. It relates to GS2 part where we talk about parliament and the structure. What is the context? The context is that there has been an inclusion of 4 MPs named in the select committee without their consent. So there is an issue over the case of content. What accounts for the content? What accounts for the consent? This is something that we are going to analyze. But before that, let us understand what is select committee. See, Parliament has got lots of work. It is not possible and not feasible to study all the bills through its length and breadth. So this particular role of studying the bills clause by clause is devolved to specialized committees. So Parliament has basically created parliamentary committees. Parliamentary committees are essentially of two nature. One, the standing committee like your public accounts committee, estimates committee, the privileges committee. At the same time, we have some ad hoc committees. These are created on case-to-case basis and they are dissolved as soon as the case is dissolved. So the select committee is one of the ad hoc committees. It is not a permanent committee. That is the first information we need to learn. These parliamentary committees are empowered under Article 105th, which gives parliamentary privileges to form such committees, and under Article 118, which gives the authority of the Parliament to make rules for functioning of these committees. Now, when we understand what is select committee, should we also think how is it formed? So a select committee is basically, this particular one was formed under Rajya Sabha, which is governed by the Rajya Sabha rules. So under rule number 125 of Rajya Sabha, the formation of this particular select committee took place. How did it perform? How did it came into effect? By the promulgation of a motion. This motion can be passed either by the minister in charge of the bill or by any other MP. So in this particular case, AAP's MP Raghav Chadha has raised this select committee. What is the composition? The composition is not prescribed anywhere, but in case the select committee is of a joint nature, then the ratio is suggested to be 1:2, 1 for Rajya Sabha and 2 part for Lok Sabha members. How are the members selected? First of all, they are selected by the House and from the members of the House. These names are specified in the motion when it is rolled out by the mover. Now this brings us to the case of consent. The mover, according to the rule 125, has to ascertain the willingness of the member. This ascertainment of the willingness can either be done with the help of signature, but not necessarily with the help of signatures. In this particular case, since signatures were not acquired, therefore the whole row has started. Now let's talk about the functions of select committee. The function is basically to do comprehensive analysis, the clause by clause analysis of any bill. For that, it can inquire the public officials as to how this bill was created. It can visit some institutions, some organizations. It can also talk to some other stakeholders. So these are all the powers it is endowed with. What is the working? The working requires, or a sitting requires, 1/3 of the quorum. This is unlike Parliament, which requires 1/10 of the quorum. The casting vote lies with the chairperson of the committee. It may appoint a subcommittee as well. Then the dissent or any difference in opinion of any member of the select committee is also recorded, and this recorded dissent along with the entire report is finally submitted to the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. This is about your select committee. Let's talk about the last article of the day. Here we will study about Assam Rifles. This is with regards to border management, internal security in India. Very, very important from both mains and prelims point of view. What is the context? Manipur police has registered criminal case against Assam Rifles for obstruction of duty because they have led some kooky militants to enter into the safe area. And therefore, Manipur police has registered a criminal case against them. This makes us to analyze, this makes us to question what are Assam Rifles. So Assam Rifles are the oldest paramilitary force in India. First of all, this does not come under military. It is one among the paramilitary forces of India. What is the legacy when we are calling it oldest? The lineage comes from 1835, when under the British, a paramilitary police force was created called Kachar Levy. This was to safeguard the northeastern frontiers and eventually led to the evolution in the form of Assam Rifles. The names were changing with the changing in powers, changing in jurisdiction. So, Kachar Levy was named as Assam Frontier Police in the year 1883, Assam Military Police in the year 1993, and finally in 1917 it was named as Assam Rifles. It is headquartered in Shillong, Meghalaya, and its motto is Friends of the Hill People. Another interesting fact about Assam Rifle is that it is the only paramilitary force which has got dual control structure, which means two different ministries are managing it. The administrative control is under the Ministry of Home Affairs, whereas the operational control is under Indian Army, which means under the Ministry of Defence. So this dual control is something that again you need to remember. It can be asked in prelims. Let's also quickly understand the overall border management of India. As we know that the role of Assam Rifle essentially is to maintain the law and order in the northeastern region, not only in the northeast region but also in the Indo-Myanmar border. Therefore, it is also known as the Sentinel of Northeast. But let's understand what forces are deployed in the other parts of borders. In the Indo-Pakistan border and in the Indo-Bangladesh border, we have deployment of BSF, Border Security Forces. In this region, we have Sashastra Seema Bal. And here we have got Assam Rifles. And somewhere here in the Indo-Chinese border, in the Indo-China border, we have got Indo-Tibetan Border Force, ITBP. And to ensure that the coastal security is maintained, we have got Indian Coast Guards. And then after economic zone, exclusive economic zone, we have got deployment of maritime security in the form of your Indian Navy. So this was about border management in India. I hope you have enjoyed the session. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.